So you were Desilu, and who did you answer to? Was it Lucy or who?
No, I answered to. It's funny how things come around. The vice president of daytime programs at CBS New York, who was moved up to be head of all programs and then moved down again by Mr. Paley, which caused Larry White to move to California, which caused me to be out of a job. He was the one who was at Desilu. It's a man named Oscar Katz. And Oscar was basically a research guy and a programmer from CBS New York, and a really lovely, lovely guy. So I basically reported to Oscar, but Oscar had no experience with film or packaging or what have you. He was a researcher and a programmer. Where programs go, how audiences feed into other programs and such. So the brunt of the whole thing was given to me, which was fine because I wouldn't want it any other way. And so I was, as the program director, reporting to Oscar and at the same time keeping Lucy abreast of exactly what I was doing.
Now, you were talking about Desi being a talented guy beyond just playing Ricky Ricardo.
Yes.
Were you making the point that since he had left Desilu, the studio suffered because of that?
The studio suffered enormously because of that. Lucy, I had an interesting relationship with Lucy. Lucy was an actor, a brilliant actor. Lucy was happiest on the stage. On stage 12 with her people doing her show. Lucy had tremendous instincts, comedic instincts. Lucy would run her show like the general. I was on the stage one day and she'd be literally moving, physically moving, and sudden, no, honey, you stand here. I mean, Lucy ran her show and ran it beautifully. Lucy wasn't a person who works with creative people on new programs and new talents and what that wasn't what Lucy did. The studio built her up as the Madam President. And when there was a shareholder meeting, she'd sit in the middle of the thing and Lucy would play Madam President and she had a big desk and what have you. But that wasn't Lucy. Lucy was the actor. Lucy used to come to my office once in a while, and I hear a knock on the door, and my secretary Lydia would call me and say, Miss Ball is here to see you. I said, oh, have her come in. Lucy come in, and she opened the door and say, hi, I'm the girl from stage 12. And I said, oh, I know you. Of course, I recognize you. Why did you come to see us and see what we're doing? I said, I will be there Thursday night, because she's shot on Thursday nights. She said, okay, good, thank you, goodbye. That was my relationship. Or I'd send her that when we finished developing and writing the first Star Trek script, I sent it to Lucy. She said she didn't understand it. She said, I only read part of it. That doesn't read it at all. They liked Mission Impossible. They read the Mission Impossible script, pilot. But Lucy wasn't the one to pick up where Desi left off. Desi was given his money, and he went down to Rancho Santa Fe by Del Mar to raise his horses. That's where he was. I met Desi a few years later when I was producing some films at Universal. Universal gave me an office, and I walked into the building, and there, across my office, it says, Desi Arnaz. So I went in there, and I said, hey, is Mr. Arnaz? No, he's not in yet. Well, tell him that Herb Solow is across the stage, just dropped in to say hello. Well, 10 minutes later, the door burst. Desi was a big guy. The door burst up, and Desi gives me a bear hug. Amigo, how are you? What have you? And he was the same old Desi and in good shape, and he was producing something. But they were gone. They were apart. However, whenever Lucy had a problem with the show, her show, guess who she called? She called Desi. Divorced or not, she would call Desi to ask for advice on things.
Despite that he was... Desi was physically not at Desilu, but
Correct.
did he have a financial interest still in the?
No, it was gone, I believe. From what I know, when the studio was sold for, it was, no, that comes later, pardon me. They got divorced, and he retained a financial, I believe he retained a financial interest in the studio, but he was no longer involved with the studio. And so there was a big void, a large void, as to how to create new programs and contact networks and get shows on the air.
Did you feel like Lucy trusted you to do your job the way you described that meeting?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I work on the basis. We later had a little bit of a problem on that thing, on that area. When I get a job, I know it's egomaniacal and everything else. I say, give me my parameters and leave me alone. If you want to get involved, you do the job. Either why hire someone and then tell them what to do, or question what they're doing? If you don't like when my contract's over, I'll tear up the contract, which you did at MGM, for instance, and get rid of me. That's fine with me, but leave me alone to either fail or succeed. But I'm not going to fail or succeed with you interfering. I did that to the president of MGM. I'll tell you a story later, which people were aghast that I would do this. But that's the way I always worked.
Was Lucy's second husband, Gary Morton, involved at Desilu?
That became the problem. Everyone liked Gary, and Gary had no place at the studio. He was not Desi Arnaz creatively. He was a nightclub comedian. He, if I must say so, carried on with more importance than he deserved because he was Lucy's husband. And Lucy came up to me one day, this is at Desilu, and said, this is after I was named vice president of Desilu and was running the thing, and said, and I was also executive in charge of production of all the shows, except Lucy's show. That was a separate, I had nothing to do with anything Lucy did. And she said, Gary is going to be executive in charge of production for Lucille Ball. I said, not while I'm here. I said, there's only one person who represents this studio as in charge of production. Now, if you want Gary to do it, that's fine with me. I'll be out of my office in 20 minutes. Give me that time. Just pack up my personal stuff and leave. If that's what you want, you tell me. Well, you just don't like it. I said, Lucy, this is the way it is. And that was the way it was. And so they backed off on that. And I just went about my business and made Desilu successful, if I must say. They were totally out of it. And within a year and a half, I had 3 major one-hour shows on network television.
So let's start with the first one of those. What was the circumstance that you first heard about what became Star Trek?
When I got the job as, no, I was still the program director. I wasn't even head of it yet. I sent out feelers to a bunch of agents saying, open for business, in essence. I picked those guys. Plus, the studio was represented by a talent agency. It's an arrangement that they'd made with Lucy. And they sent over various people to me. The first guy who came in was a big, awkward Texan who mumbled his way in my office and said, I'm Gene Roddenberry. And I said, how are you? And he sat down and he had a piece of paper all crumpled and he said, I have an idea. I said, well, let me look at it. And he explained it to me. And it was like many other shows. It had a few things that I thought were very attractive. It was Buck Rogers. I mean, it was Flash Gordon. It had the hero and it had the scientific guy and had the pretty girl. And it was the usual, if you remember the old comic books, the old serials with Buster Crabbe. I mean, that's what it was. However, what he had done is he had set it up whereby it's naval and there was the admiral and the commander and the yeoman and the ensign and the this and the that. And it kind of gave a different aura to it because it made it contemporary. It suddenly, it was now or it was the future. And I thought that was very good. I also liked the fact that this theory was not to do monster movies. I mean, monster in science fiction had always been done on B pictures. And I'll tell you stories about the B pictures that we suddenly did not want to make. And that I thought was very good. I want to do more interesting human stories. But it was the same thing. He later called it Wagon Train to the Stars. It's a bunch of people going out in space and meeting others, strange people, what have you. Now, heretofore, it always was that if you saw an alien, what did you do? You shot him, because that's the American way of dealing with aliens in space. You see what I mean. Every time someone landed from, if Orson Welles says a Martian has just landed in New Jersey, what do? They send out the army to shoot him. That's what they do. We had a theory that what they do is they try to find out who they are, what they're doing there, and try to talk to each other. So I like that. What I did not like was Mr. Spock was red, it had a pointed tail. He was a devil. This was because Gene had this idea about the devils on board. I said, and a whole bunch of other things that was just did not make it. So I said, okay, let me see what I can do with getting some money from NBC for this. Because of the fact color was just coming in. I think it was 1949 or 1959. I think 59. That the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, set up a committee called the NTSC, the National Television Study, Color, whatever, to decide once and for all what process would be used for transmitting color television. And information went out to the various labs and such. I mean, you had to have one. You couldn't have two different systems for telecasting color because people could not have two television sets. So it got down to the CBS lab system owned by CBS and RCA, which owned NBC. The CBS system was chosen. The CBS system was one camera as opposed to RCA's 3-camera system. And the CBS system was less expensive and also to deal with and less expensive for the home television viewer to buy a television set. However, it had a problem. There were at that time about 55,000 black and white television sets in America in use. The CBS system in color could not be picked up on the black and white television sets. So the FCC gave CBS Labs a period of time, I think it was a year or so, to redevelop it, to come up with a system that's compatible. That if you have a black and white television set, you could still watch a black and white image of a color transmitted show. They could not. So finally, the committee gave their okay to the RCA 3-color system, and the term NTSC was born. If you live in a foreign country, if you live in the UK or in Europe, except for France, their system is PAL, P-A-L. In France, it's CCAM, but that's being changed. They're picking up, I think, PAL also. In America and in Canada, it's NTSC. The NTSC system is the RCA system. So suddenly here is RCA is the one, that system is approved for all television in the United States. And they also own NBC. So it kind of made sense that they need color programming. It's that chicken and egg business. What do you do first? Do you sell color television sets? I'm not going to buy a color TV set if there's nothing to watch in color. Or do you make the color programs and hope that people will like them in color and they will therefore buy RCA or anyone's, but RCA was a big seller at the time, RCA's color television set. NBC went ahead and they made a Western called Bonanza, which was a house project. Western America, Ponderosa Pines, horses, etc., whatever. They shot up at Lake Tahoe and they shot on at Paramount. I think they shot somewhere in the valley also at times, but basically it's Lake Tahoe for X number of weeks, and then they moved down onto the Paramount lot. And they needed other things. So I called NBC. I think I called Jerry Stanley and Grant, and I said, guys, listen, this is what we have. And I explained Star Trek. They knew me. They had faith in me. They knew we were all good friends. We'd worked together. And I said, I think this could be this, whatever. And they said, okay, we'll give you money for a script. Went back to Gene, and I said, I'm making a deal with NBC. Before then, let me back up a little bit, something that created a little problem. I was working with Gene for about 6 months and developing Star Trek. It was only the two of us to develop it. At times, we were going to name it Gulliver's Travels, and the guy was going to be Captain Gulliver. I mean, we went all over the place thinking, what's different, what would be interesting, what would people buy, what would they like? What are the characters' names? Does Mrs. Spock have a first name? What is his first name? Where's he from? He had to come up with all kinds of stuff. Plus, the concept for stories. While I was doing that, unbeknownst to me, my boss takes it to CBS. And with Gene, and pitches it to CBS. If there was a worse spokesman for a television series at the time, worse than Gene Roddenberry, I never met him. Gene would mumble, and Gene would talk very softly, and everyone's going like this, trying to hear what he's saying. Gene thought that was a plus, that everyone's paying attention. I said, no, I don't think so, Gene. Not really. And they went to CBS without me knowing it, because I told you, if I'm going to do something, I'm doing it. And
your boss at Desi Lou?
Went there with Gene to CBS, where he used to work. He was a big gun there, Oscar. And they went there, and they both pitched it. I was not at the meeting. I have to believe they didn't pitch it well. But even if they did, CBS was not interested because they had Lost in Space, an entirely different program. Believe me, a different program. And so I later learned that I said, what did you do that for? So I went and I carried on a bit, as I'm prone to do. If something's going to happen, I'm going to do it with my producer and writer. That's the person I'm working with. So it was then cut and dried. I'm going to take care of these things. That's when I went to NBC. And I got a deal from Grant and Jerry. And Mort Werner was the program guy back in New York. I knew Mort. And so they gave us some money for a script. We decided, I recommended, and they happily agreed to do it as a movie. Because if a 2-hour movie, because if it didn't make it as a pilot, they could get some of their investment back, and hopefully we could also, by running it on NBC as a movie of the week. So we now had an order. We needed a script, and Gene wrote the script, which I have some strange doubts about, but I'm not going to go into it here because it involves another person who has since died, because I believe that guy did most of the script. And he would never admit it to me. He's a friend of mine. He said, I'd rather not go there, Herb. I said, I understand. Fine. It's fine with me. Bottom line, we had the script, and I took it to NBC, and I got NBC to give us, I think, $875,000 for the 2-hour movie. This was a little tiny studio that was doing the Lucy show, suddenly doing a 2-hour, a science fiction movie. with effects and things and different planets and what a weird people and such. So we started doing it. Hired Bob Butler, good journeyman, solid director. We hired Jeffrey Hunter to play the lead. Jeffrey had mostly done films, had done one Western television series at Warner Brothers. And Jeffrey played Jesus Christ, you see, I figured. You can't do better than that. I mean, we're ahead of the game here, right? And we hired a whole cast of people, including Leonard Nimoy, which guy Gene knew of, because when Gene's only experience producing was a limited series at MGM called The Lieutenant with Gary Lockwood. And MGM was no longer interested in dealing with Gene as a producer. Gene was not it wasn't Gene's interest. He was not a guy on this who would go produce. I hired a guy who was assistant director, later made him associate producer, and then the co-producer, Bob Justman, who really was a guy who produced that series. Gene was rarely on the set, except to go see the girls. That's what Gene liked, to talk to the girls. And was not just wasn't good at that. He had no experience. He was an airline pilot. He was an LAPD police officer. This wasn't his kind of interest. And so we, in essence, I worked on it. Gene worked on it. I hired Bob as an assistant director on the show. The recommendation came from a classmate of mine from college named James Goldstone, who later directed our second pilot. And Jimmy was a director, and I knew Jimmy at Dartmouth. And he was directing some shows for Leslie Stevens. And I called Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, I need a good assistant director. Because the guys here are used to doing Lucy and the comedies, and I need someone who has a grasp of everything, knows production, and is outspoken, and he says what's on his mind. He gets the job done. And he said, well, there's a guy over here, there are two guys over here. One is named Bob Justman, one is named Lee Katzen, and they're assistant directors, and they're very, very good, and Leslie Stevens has them under contract. It was Leslie's company. He was doing Outer Limits, and Leslie was doing Western. The name will come to me. So I called Leslie, and I said, Leslie, I want to borrow one of you guys. Oh, no, you don't. I said, Leslie, let me tell you something. I promise. Leslie, I promise I'll return Justman to you. I need him for 2 weeks prep and 2 weeks shoot. Then he's back again. Are you sure? Leslie, would I not tell you anything? So Les said, okay. So Justman came over. He came over after the script had been done, after the special effects guy had been hired, because the special effects people at the studio hired the physical effects and the optical effect company. And I had Bob, and I cast the show, and as I said earlier, Gene liked Leonard Nimoy. He knew him. And so we started making the show. NBC had no concept really of what we were doing. They sent a guy over. They asked to see dailies, or I refused to send them dailies, which I always did. If you want to see it, you come. We run dailies at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't want to see dailies, don't come, fine. But I'm not making a second set of dailies, and so I'm just not doing that. Get rid of me, dump the show, cancel us, whatever you want to do. We're not doing it. So once in a while, someone from NBC came over to see what we were doing. We cut the picture together. I took it to New York. At the same time, I was working with Bruce Geller. Bruce had an idea called Brig Squad, loosely based on a movie called Topkapi, if you remember the movie, the Turkish museum stealing the whatever, how to get it done and such. And so Bruce had this thing, and I worked on it with Bruce, developing this thing, and we decided to call it Mission Impossible as opposed to Briggs Squad. The lead was Mr. Briggs. Mr. Briggs was the guy. And we were looking for a lead for the show, and an agent mentioned an actor on Broadway who was doing Freud named Stephen Hill. And so we hired Stephen. Sight unseen, Stephen flew out. And then we hired, we needed, it's like saying, we're putting together a symphony orchestra. We need a good violinist and a good horn player and a good percussion, what have you. So we needed a woman to pose with clothes, who wore clothes well. We hired Barbara Bain. We needed a guy who really knew about electronics and could really handle all this weird stuff that we attend doing. We needed that kind of mind. And various people came in to read, and we liked Greg. We did not hire Greg because he was an African American. We hired Greg because he was good for the part. We hired, and a really decent, lovely guy. We hired Greg.
Greg Morris.
Greg Morris,
Okay.
yeah. Whose son, by the way, is named Philip Morris, and our sponsor was Philip Morris. And if you ever see the Seinfeld show, the guy who plays the lawyer, the fast-talking lawyer, is Philip Morris from Greg, from whatever. So we hired Greg. Then the concept of the pilot was that there's something in a vault that we want. That vaults are made, huge bank vaults. Vaults are made where people won't break in, but they don't protect themselves for people to break out. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. This was the concept. So it meant smuggling someone inside the vault. And we hired Wally Cox, who was a little guy, to put inside a piece of luggage. So with a piece of luggage with Wally Cox inside, who's going to carry it, right? A big muscle guy's going to carry it. So we sent out word for a muscle guy. My assistant used to play poker every Friday night with a bunch of guys. And one of them was a guy who was in Beach Party pictures, and also was in Italy doing one of the Hercules movies or whatever. His name was Rock Stevens. So we called in Rock, and in comes Rock Stevens. And I looked at him, I said, all right, what's the real name? I'm Rock Stevens. Sam Arkoff told me I have to be Rock Stevens because that's Rock. I said, no. You don't understand. I don't want Rock Stevens. What's your name? Pete Lupus. I said, better. I said, let me explain this to you. He has a charming, a gentle, really a very gentle person. This big guy, Pete. I said, I'll tell you what. We want to hire Peter Lupus. Not Pete Lupus, Peter Lupus. Now, can we hire you for a pilot only as Peter Lupus? Well, I don't know. He wanted to be Pete. I said, no, you don't understand. We want Peter Lupus. He finally agreed. So now we had Peter Lupus, we had Barbara Bain, we had Greg Morris, and Stephen Hill. The guest on this particular show was a guy who was an expert on makeup. And we looked around, and it was very difficult finding the kind of person we wanted. And Bruce's friend was Barbara's husband, Marty Landau. So and we made the deal with Marty. Marty did not want to be in the series. Marty just wanted to be, Marty's an actor. He wanted to he's versatile, which he truly is. He wanted to do various other roles. He didn't want to be locked into a series. A lot of actors felt that way. I acted at MGM later on. James Daly, he didn't want to be locked into a show. So I said, Marty, fine. So we now had our cast. We needed a director who not only would understand this kind of material, but also would understand Bruce. Bruce was a highly energetic Yale graduate, very smart, who had his own way he wanted to do things. And I wanted someone as a balance to Bruce. So I learned that Bruce that there was a company, a little group, a few years earlier that did the Dick Powell Theater, composed of Bruce Geller, Sam Peckinpah, and Bernie Kowalski. Kowalski and Peckinpah being directors, Bruce being a producer-writer. And that they first, Bruce and Bernie broke away from Peckinpah because he decided to do movies. And Bruce and Bernie produced, I think, either the last two or the final season of Rawhide. They were relieved of their command, I am told, by various sources, including them, when they did an episode of Rawhide without any cattle in it. It was an esoteric exercise they did. And Mr. Paley happened to see it. And the next day he called Geller and said, "Where are my cows?" And that ended that. Bruce and Bernie were available, right? So I said, the guys, they worked together for years, but they didn't really get the two entirely different people. I said, "Bruce, I'm going to hire Bernie." "No, you're not. I'm not Bruce. Bernie's going to do it. And I got to ask you a favor, because when I speak to Bernie, he's going to carry on also. I'm going to tell him that you're not going to work on the set. It's my show." "No, you can't," because I knew if they walked on the set, there'd be things happening. They both agreed. I hired Bernie, and Bernie did a bang-up job on the show. I thought it was really good. CBS saw it and said, "This is marvelous." We had our own money in it, by the way, because CBS, we being Desilu, because CBS would not fund it. Even though there was a development deal with Lucy that they had, they didn't think that a television series that worked on the basis of story as opposed to character would work. We had no star. We had 5 stars. We treated the show as a show with 5 stars. So we took some development money from a CBS Lucy fund, and we used that to finance the show. It was beautifully done. We hired Lalo Schifrin to score it for us, and Lalo, the theme that Lalo wrote for the main theme wasn't to our liking, and Bruce was very good with music, and we were listening to it, and the end of the show is a chase scene, whereby theoretically we're leaving Havana and rushing out to the airport, being chased by these people. In essence, it was we're leaving St. Mary's College up in Brentwood and going out to Burbank, where at the Burbank airport where we're going to get on a plane, theoretically Havana, and take off. Some interesting parts of that whole thing. We loved the chase scene, music. We did not like the main title music. The chase scene music was lifted out and put into the main title. It is now the famous Mission Impossible main title theme, which is really a chase scene at the end. When we got to the airport, I needed, I needed an airplane to take them away. You can't have an ordinary airplane. We needed a Lear jet, which was not many people had a Lear jet at the time. Frank Sinatra had one, so we hired Frank Sinatra's Lear jet, right? Because Lucy's attorney and my attorney was Frank's attorney. So we're 3 o'clock in the morning. We're at Burbank Airport where they shot the end of Casablanca, right? And remember, Sinatra's Lear comes in and lands, and the people in control tower call and says, "That's Sinatra's plane." And I said, "Yes, it is." Came in, and our car rolls up, and our 5 principals get out and rush into the plane, and Barbara won't go because she's claustrophobic. So, because the Learjet is a tiny, at least it was back then, a little plane. So we finally worked on the basis that in the thing and out, then we'll take off without her. We'll work it out to make it easier all around. So we so we ended up shooting it at 3 in the morning at Burbank. It was raining. We put it together. Lalo scored it. I take both to New York now. I have Mission and I have Star Trek. And the luck was with us because I sold both in the same week. So I got on the phone and I called Bob Justman, and Bob was also the assistant director on Mission because I trusted Bob. Bob's production judgment was flawless, and he worked with the crew so very well. And so I got on the phone. I said, "I have to tell you something." He said, "Don't tell me you sold one. I mean, they're possible to make." I said, "No, I didn't sell it." He said, "Oh, good. I sold both, Bob." He said, "It was a little studio doing 2 huge shows. Star Trek was a huge show. It shot on distant planets, lots of effects, lots of characters. We had to build sets. It's easy for a writer to say he picks up the phone. Okay, what does a phone look like? You write anything you want to, but someone has to convert that into something practical. He opens the window. How does the window open? So we had to come up with all these ways of doing it. And that's a whole story of a guy named Matt Jeffries, who was brilliant, who was our production designer. And Matt came up with all these ways of doing things. How do you afford to make a spaceship look different? You know how you do it? You know how the television sets come out of cartons with all that styrofoam? You paint it and glue it to the wall. That's what you do. No one knows, but it looks a little different. There's more cheating on that show of things. If people knew what it really was, they just wouldn't believe it. We had no money for either show, and we suddenly had 2 huge 1-hour shows to do every week.
And what of your promise to get Bob Justman back to his other job in 2 weeks?
Well, I called Leslie. I said, "Leslie, I'll tell you what." By the way, at that time I had to deal with Leslie to do a pilot, right? I said, "Leslie, I have to keep Justman. I mean, this is an advance for him. I mean, if I don't have him, I'm going to have big trouble. I got these 2 1-hour shows." "Oh, I understand, Herb. Okay." So that was fine with Leslie. So that was fine.
So with little money at Desilu,
little money.
How did you pull this off?
Well, we had to deficit finance each of them. At that time, the networks paid X% of the cost of the show, because they knew that we would take the show, and we had syndication rights. Because in that antitrust decree, the networks were no longer allowed to say, "If I buy your programming, I get your syndication rights." It had to be separate. You could not do that. So Desilu and all the studios at the time would end up owning the distribution rights foreign, would own the syndication rights after the network run, would own merchandising, music, etc. So they only paid you a percentage of the cost of the show. That happens today also, apparently. So it came from Lucy. I mean, it was a little tiny studio. And so Lucy had to deficit it. When I returned with both sales, there was a board meeting. I was not a member of the board of directors of Desilu. That was that was the old guys who'd been with Lucy for years, which is fine for me. And I spoke to Lucy ahead of time, because what was happening is that the financial people were saying, "Gee, you have the sale, but it's going to bankrupt us. It's going to cause us serious problems. We're a little studio, et cetera, et cetera." And that we should either turn down the order, especially on Star Trek, or sell it to some other studio. And I went to Lucy, because Lucy was a trooper. I mean, Lucy was a showwoman. And I said, Desilu has been out of the television business for a few years now. They used to be very big with Untouchables and what have you. Nothing now. I said, this will catapult the studio right back into a position of importance. 2 major 1-hour shows, one on CBS, one on NBC. And if this is what you want, we have it for you. And I think it would be wrong to now to go against it. And Lucy, understanding showmanship, said, "Let's go and do it." So The financial people lost, I won, and they hated me ever since, which is another chapter.
But you spoke of that in your first meeting with Lucy when you first came aboard. She said, "Go
get
make me shows," and you
get
gave
me
her
shows. And so I said, "We got you shows, Lucy. I got you shows." But the financial people were saying, Lucy, we're protecting you, and they were. I mean, they were doing their job.
Right.
They're just doing their job to protect Lucy and Lucy's money. But you can't do both things. So we ended up doing Mission. She agreed to do Mission and Star Trek, both expensive shows to do.
You said that the idea was to do a 2-hour movie for Star Trek. How did that become basically a couple of pilots?
Okay, so now before that happened, I did jump ahead. You're right. When we showed NBC the 2-hour pilot with Jeffrey Hunter, NBC thought the production values were spectacular, especially for Little Desilu. I got to tell, I mean, when you went into our prop shop and said we need this laser pistol with the whatever, they made one. It was unusable. Bob Justman went out and found a guy who made things. We used to go, the studio was not equipped to do this kind of programming every week. So, but the production we done was really good. And NBC understood that. They really liked the production. Some things in the show they did not like. Now, the party line, there is a Star Trek party line, which is what Gene wanted everyone to believe. Like NBC are the villains. They're the evil ones who canceled the show. That they did just the opposite. NBC spent millions of dollars promoting the show, buying the show, protecting the show, losing money on non-sponsorship. They were great about it. And in the 2-hour pilot, in Gene's way, I guess I should have stopped it. I did not. We had a green dancing girl named Susan Oliver, an actress. And she did a lot of green dancing, not clad in too many garments, let's say. And NBC pointed out that the green dancer girl and the ears on that character, the pointed ears, would not play well in the big region down in the southeast, in the Bible Belt, that the many important affiliates who own groups of stations would not take the show. Now, Gene turned that around, not to talk about that with the Star Trek fans, but said, NBC thought it was too cerebral. It wasn't. It wasn't at all. It was Gene's way of saying, I know what I'm doing, NBC doesn't. It later got on the show, like within the first year, I had to bring in a producer, because NBC would not talk to Gene. And I would not let Gene go to NBC for meetings. Gene took care of looking over the scripts and working with some of the casting, but his taste wasn't the kind of taste for network television, period. So NBC said, we love the show, Herb. We're not going to program it. So I had a meeting with Grant and Mort, I think Herb Schlosser. I know Grant and Mort. And I said, let us do it again. They said, are you crazy? I said, oh, wait. You like the production, what have you. We found a lot of things wrong that we had done. We found a lot of things right that we had done. What we want to do now is to do a 1-hour pilot. 2 reasons. One, it'll show you exactly what the 1-hour form, how it works with Star Trek. And secondly, it's an episode of the series. If you then buy the series, we have an episode already. The money's been spent, well spent. I said, we will deficit some of it. So they finally agreed to this, to have Desilu write 3 scripts, and NBC will pick one, and that's the one that we will make. Firm 1-hour commitment for a pilot. That's fine for me. Okay. I said, thank you very much, gentlemen. won't let you down. Went back. Hired 3 writers. Hired Sam Peoples, who was a marvelous writer, who happened to be an expert on Edgar Rice Burroughs, had various television series he produced and that he created, and knew all about science fiction. Had a great collection of even the early science fiction magazines, the dime magazines and what have you. And hired a guy named Stephen Kendall, who was a very fine writer, and I gave one assignment to Roddenberry. I said, go write. The 3 scripts came in. Sam Peoples' script was a good action adventure, easy to understand, 2 good guest stars, places. That would be great to do that, because it doesn't touch base on any problems that have been presented to us. Stephen came in with a thing about a space voyager who traveled around space with a bunch of girls. We call them, in his hookers, he traveled around space, right? Which was fun. His name Mudd. Mudd's women, and his name was Harry Mudd, played by a great actor, great character actor. Excuse me. And the last one was Gene's script, which was kind of a mediocre script. And I thought that Sam Peoples' script was one we should do. And I called NBC. I said, if you want to hear my vote, it's for Sam Peoples' script. And I explained why. And they read it. They came back and said, we will go along with that. So we started to cast it. That's when we ran into problems. NBC was not too happy with most of the cast in the 2-hour movie. However, they say it's fine. You could use all of them if you want to, except one. Get rid of the guy who plays Mr. Spock, the guy with the ears. We don't want that character. Or if you keep him, the ears have to go. And I said, let's address that later, okay? This is Herb. Let's address that later. What we'll do is we will now recast. But I first think, what do you think of Jeffrey Hunter? Yeah, he was okay. Let's keep Jeffrey Hunter. Fine. Called Jeffrey and I said, Jeffrey, we are running the pilot. We'd like you to come down. Gene and I will be there with you and to show you what we've done and talk about the future. Now, a strange thing happened. When you hire an actor, at least at that time, you hire an actor to do the pilot with an option for the series. You don't hire an actor to do a pilot with an option for a pilot and then an option for a series. We had no rights to exercise that option on Jeffrey Hunter. Jeffrey comes down into the room. Lights go down. We sit there and he walks. No, I'm sorry. No, wrong. Jeffrey's wife comes down. Is Jeffrey coming? No, I'm here to look at it for him on his behalf. Fine, Mrs. Hunter, sit down. Lights go down, the movie starts, lights go up. Well, Mrs. Hunter, you have to understand, Jeffrey is a movie star. He doesn't do television series. I said, well, this is an important series. No, I'm sorry. Jeffrey Hunter is not available for this. Let me give you an aside, which is interesting. A week before the final episode of Star Trek, the first series, went on the air, Jeffrey Hunter slipped off a staircase and died in a fall at his home in Beverly Hills. The next night was the last episode of Star Trek. It was very interesting how it all happened. He had no career after that. None. He could have had a career. He could have had the whole future. His son later called me and came down and spoke to Harrison and myself, and we talked about that, about his dad and such. And but bottom line, we were without an actor. I also wanted to keep Leonard, because I thought Leonard did a great job, and it turns out Leonard was spectacular in the series. So we needed actors. We send out casting calls. By the way, no one was interested in Star Trek. I mean, you mention Star Trek to someone, they go, yeah? Let me back up I forgot to tell you, when we finished the first pilot, I'm looking for a composer. No composer wanted to score it. I called all the agents who handle composers. I said, we have this, it's a 2-hour movie, etc. No, not really. The reason being, of course, is that no one had any faith that Star Trek would ever get on the air. And that composer's work that we would then own the rights to was tied up on a piece of film. Could never be used again. And composers, rather, they will gamble that they're going to do the pilot that has a chance of selling. No one thought Star Trek would sell. Everyone liked the music. Sandy Courage did it. How did I get Sandy Courage? Sandy was the top arranger at Fox, who occasionally scored television shows. He scored Daniel Boone, etc. But he did all the arrangements and orchestrations for John Williams. He did Fiddler. He did My Fair Lady. He did. Sandy was top in his world. The only guy we could find was Sandy. And how did we get Sandy? Lucy's band leader, Wilbur Hatch, on the lot, heard I could not get a composer, came up and said, Herb, listen, there's a guy I know named Alexander Courage. You may want to call him. So I called him, and the strangest thing happened on Star Trek. All weird things, how we got the various people involved.
Well, as far as casting, so the very actor that NBC wanted to get rid of was the only holdover?
The only one I wanted to keep.
Okay.
We wanted to keep Jeffrey because NBC liked him,
right.
but he was gone. I was fine. If he's gone, then we'd have to get someone else. But Leonard, we're going to keep. And I tabled a discussion on the ears with NBC. So we recast the entire show. We brought in DeForest Kelley to play the Doctor, D. Kelley, old-time Western actor, marvelous guy, top professional performer. We had Leonard, of course, and then we filled in very few roles we had to fill in later on. We couldn't find certain people, etc. Gene had some recommendations of people, but we had everyone. We needed a star. And an agent, I think named Ina Bernstein, called and said, we have a client in New York named William Shatner, he's a Canadian actor, and he just finished doing this little low-budget movie, and they sent us the movie. And Gene and I saw the movie. Strangely, it was written by a writer who later became a Star Trek writer, George Clayton Johnson. In fact, George played a part in it. It was, I think, a Roger Corman. It was a low-budget kind of movie. And we had seen Shatner on an episode of Twilight Zone with the gorilla on the wing, that episode. And so we hired Billy. We saw him, but we hadn't met him, and he came out. So now we had the cast. And I decided, again, as I said earlier, with NBC, that we'll do Sam Peoples' script, and needed a director I could work with that I've known. I hired Jimmy Goldstone, again, away from whatchamacallit, where I got Justman from.
Leslie Stevens.
From Leslie, right. Called Daystar Productions.
Right.
Yeah, Daystar. And I hired Jimmy away, and we made the show. And it went back there. NBC liked it. I took it to Preview House. Do you know about Preview House? I don't know if it's there today. Probably not. On Sunset Boulevard was a building called Preview House, and it was where we tested films. The research guys had, I don't know who owned it, but it was privately owned. And it was very good for us. They had, I think, 300 seats, and they were wired, and people were invited, supposedly screened, and they press a button, like, dislike, and we see a graph up in the booth on those scenes that people liked and disliked. And I found out an interesting thing about science fiction and people, in that I left the booth and walked down. I was into the auditorium. I'm sitting in the back, and I hear two
of our people who were judging the show saying, "Do you think this was shot in Hollywood?" "Oh, no, this was shot on a planet, you know. You could see it." And I'm listening to this and I'm going, we'll get on the air with this. Right? And ended up, NBC liked it. The research on it was good. But I'm going to back up a bit, again, about Leonard Nimoy. And that they felt the story was good and the color was good. It would sell television sets. The story with Leonard is before we started shooting it, I had to confront NBC with Leonard's ears. And I said to Schloss, I've decided we have to keep the ears. We don't like, Herb, listen, the only way we can tell if someone tunes into the show that it's a different kind of show with aliens or what have you, someone has to be different aboard. It can't be all American guys and girls. It doesn't work that way. So he said, okay, but you have to promise me if it goes on the air that there will be no Mr. Spock episodes in which he's featured for the first 6. That's a deal, Herb. Done. Okay. We make the show. Now NBC decides to put it on the air. So they make up brochures, and networks at that time made up sales brochures for those pilots that they wanted to go to series, that they would then send out to all the advertising agencies, et cetera, whoever they sent things to, about this is the show. And guess what? They airbrushed out Leonard's ears on the brochure, which NBC sent me one. I said, well, what are you going to do about this? We're still going to keep the ears. They put us on the air. We start shooting. We have such trouble with effects. It is so difficult to turn out. We turned out a show every 7 days. It's like doing a B picture for Solow Studio every 7 days. We fell behind. If it takes 7 days to do the show, let's say 6 or 7 to shoot it, and then the number of days to get the effects in and to get and to dub it, you would score it and dub it and get it printed and out, is more than 7 days. And so every time it goes on the air, we lose 2 or 3 days. So we're getting really backed up. We starting early, producing we produced starting in August, I believe, or early September. It didn't help us. We kept losing ground. So it turns out that the only shows that we could get ready, the light shows, light on effect, were shows with Mr. Spock. And I called Herb. I said, I can't help it, Herb. The shows, some Mr. Spock shows going on within the first 6. They went on. Fade out for like 2 weeks. Fade in on the makeup room. I had changed the 2 shows, shot Mission in 2 stages here, Star Trek 2 stages here. In the middle, I broke out the wall and put in 2 large makeup rooms because both shows needed makeup. Star Trek definitely with aliens needed makeup. Mission with Marty Landau, and I'll tell you later how we got Marty in the show. He needed makeup. Barbara needed makeup and hair in the morning. So therefore, we had to make some nice facilities, not the old stuff that was still remaining, which I thought was terrible. So we built them, and they were really very nice. And Bill Shatner had his makeup done here, Leonard had his makeup done here, and then the rest of the cast, Mission was over on this side with a wall, and they had their own makeup facility. While they're getting ready in the morning, the mail guys come in with sacks of mail for Leonard. Literally sacks of mail. And Bill gets maybe 1 package. And he looks over, and you suddenly realize who's the star of the show.
So Spock is a big hit.
Spock is a smash hit.
Let's change tape.
Okay.